Shalom everyone, it's Rabbi Leynor. We're going to be discussing Passover. Pesach is the Hebrew word. Now the Hebrew word Pesach, Pesamachet, means to pass by or to spare. That was actually the name of the sacrifice itself. The holiday Passover is doing the Pesach sacrifice and then the Feast of Unleavened Bread for 7 days. Together they made it 8 altogether. So when the temple was still standing, Pesach was a festival that began with the sacrifice of a lamb, which was then eaten at a meal. And by the way, the only people that still do this are the Samaritans, who have about 1,000 of them living in the West Bank in Palestine, what will be Palestine. Pesach commemorates the deliverance of Israel's firstborn from the judgment God brought on the firstborn of the Egyptians, which led to the liberation of the Hebrews from Egyptian slavery. And Pesach is identical with the Matzot festival. This is Exodus 12:14 through 17 and Leviticus 23:5 and 6, and was instituted for an everlasting statute. Leviticus 23, however, seems to distinguish between Pesach, which is set for the 14th day of the month, and by the way, that's the first month of the Hebrew calendar, and the Festival of Unleavened Bread appointed for the 15th day. Pesach lasted 7 days, from sunset on the 14th day to sunset on the 21st day. The first and the 7th days were Sabbaths, or Shabbats. Thus no work was permitted on those days except such as was necessary in preparing the food, and that comes from Numbers 28:16 through 25. During the 7 days of the festival, leaven was not to be found in the habitations of the Hebrews. This is Exodus 12:19, 13:7 also. Leaven, yeast basically, was not to be eaten under penalty of excision, and the eating of unleavened bread was commanded. On the 2nd day of the Omer of the new barley was brought to the temple. The Omer is counting. This is Leviticus 23:10 through 16. And the setting aside, slaughtering, and eating of the Paschal lamb was introductory to the celebration of the festival. According to Exodus 12, this rite was instituted by Moses in Egypt in anticipation of the judgment about to be visited upon Pharaoh and the Egyptian people. On the 10th of the month, the Hebrews were to take a lamb for each household, without blemish, a male of the first year, from the sheep or from the goats. They kept it until the 14th day, when the lamb was sacrificed at the going down of the sun. Deuteronomy 16:6. The blood was sprinkled by means of a bunch of hyssop. That's Exodus 12:22, on the 2 doorposts and on the lintels of the house where the Hebrews assembled to eat the lamb during the night. Moses told the Hebrews to be prepared for the impending journey with loins girded, shoes on their feet, and staffs in their hand, and to eat in haste. The lamb was to be roasted at the fire, not boiled in water or left raw. Its head, legs, and inwards were not to be removed, and it was to be eaten with bitter herbs and unleavened bread. Nothing was left until the morning. Anything that remained was to be burned. So that's why I told you before, that description: loins girded, shoes on your feet, staffs in your hand, and eat in haste. Passover Seder sometimes could take 6 to 10 hours. This is what I was talking about before. The details of this rite as observed in Egypt are summarized in the ordinance of the Pesach. No bone was to be broken. The meal was to be eaten in one house. No foreigner could participate. Circumcision was a prerequisite in the case of servants bought for money and of the stranger desiring to participate. This is Exodus 12:43 to 48. And according to Numbers, Book of Numbers 9:6, Levitical purity was another prerequisite. During the Second Temple period, the Passover lamb was killed in the temple court where all other kodashim were slaughtered. It was incumbent upon every man and woman to fulfill this obligation. The time between the two evenings, ben ha'arbaim, was construed to mean afternoon and until nightfall. The killing of the lamb following immediately upon that of the tamid, the burning of the incense, and the setting in order of the lamps, according to the daily routine of the temple. The killing was done with great caution to avoid contact with leaven. After the carcass had been properly prepared and the blood properly disposed of, don't forget we are not allowed to have the blood that belongs to God, it was taken home by its owner and roasted and eaten at evening. The owners of the lambs were divided into 3 sets, kitot, of at least 30 each, and during the slaughtering, never less than 30 could be present in the courtyard. And when the first group had entered the courtyard, the doors were closed, and while the Levites sang the Hallel, these are a group of psalms, the lambs were killed. The psalms were sung up to 3 times if necessary. In prescribed order, the trumpets were blown, while the priest stood ready with gold and silver utensils to sprinkle the blood. Blood has cleansing and magical powers. This goes back long before anyone had a religion. The vessel was passed from one to the other, that many might have a part in the sacred act, until it reached the priest nearest the altar. The empty pan was returned. The carcasses were then suspended on iron hooks along the walls and columns, or even on poles, shouldered between 2 men. The excrement was removed and the proper parts salted and incensed on the altar. The doors were then reopened, and as one group departed, the next was admitted, after which the court was cleansed. This order was observed even when the 14th fell on a Shabbat, but in that case the several groups would wait at certain stations in the temple until the Sabbath was over before proceeding homeward. And after the temple was destroyed, the rabbis introduced new laws for keeping the festivals, including Pesach. They regarded it as a positive duty on the first night to relate the miracles incidental to Israel's deliverance from Egypt, which led to the Haggadah, which means the telling, and the Seder, which is the meal. Each Jew was obliged to drink on this night 4 cups of wine, arba kosot. Originally there were 3 cups, but since Rabbinic Judaism and early Christianity were developing at the same time, no Jew would want anything having to do with 3, the Trinity. So red wine, another was added. Red wine was excluded later owing to the blood of the accusation. The rabbis instructed participants to recline in the position of free men while eating the unleavened bread and drinking the wine. The benedictions over the several cups were specified. Charoset was also compulsory, midivrei sofrim, for this meal. Charoset is the mixture of apples, chopped up apples, nuts, honey, wine, which kind of represents the mortar for the mud bricks that the Hebrews had to make. The practice of eating bitter herbs now, though the Paschal lamb is no longer prepared, is characterized as an institution of the scribes. By the way, Jews, except for the bone, and that could be any kind of a bone, Jews do not use a lamb. Most of the meals are from either beef or something else. So it's strange when every year I do a Passover Seder in a different church, and that is where they use the lamb, because obviously the Lamb of God in Christianity is very important. Greek word afikoman, usually a dessert of sweet ingredients, was excluded from this meal. This is in Pesachim 10:8. And its place being taken by a piece of unleavened bread, which as such is very familiar in Jewish folklore and proverbs. Afikomen is the last thing that is shared, and the afikomen, really, I think this developed probably because the Greeks, after they would have a philosophical discussion, and a lot of the Passover Seder is kind of structured on that same way. A student would ask a question, and the rest of the philosophical discussion would be based on answering that. In the Passover Seder, the child usually begins by asking, why is this night different? And the rest of the Seder really answers those questions that are brought up. And after the Greeks would finish their philosophical discussions, they would go out and debauch and do all kinds of other things. And in Jewish tradition, the rabbinic tradition, once you were finished with that, you would not be going out and doing anything else. You would be home with your family. In rabbinical literature, Pesach was extended to 8 days, including the 22nd of Nisan, and the 23rd of Nisan came to be regarded as a semi-holiday and Isur L'Chag.